Thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. 6 Nigerians charged over their role in a coup attempt on Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu. US President Donald Trump says he expects to be bombing Iran if progress is not made with peace talks. Plus, Amnesty International warns governments of the world on the dangers of a predatory world order. Let's begin. We kick things off here in Nigeria with the Attorney General at the Federal High Court filing treason charges against 6 Nigerians, including a retired Major General and a serving police inspector, for their role in trying to topple President Bola Tinubu. Those charged are Muhammad Ibrahim Gana, a retired Major General, Erasmus Ochegobia Victor, a retired Navy captain, Ahmed Ibrahim, a police inspector, Zekari Umoru, an electrician working at the presidential villa, Bukar Kashim Goni, a civilian, and Abdul Qadir Sani, an Islamic cleric. A 7th person, a former governor and former minister, Timipre Silva, was also named. The court document said he was still at large. The Nigerian military had denied there was a coup when rumors started swirling last October. Planned military parade marking the country's 65th independence anniversary were cancelled as a result. In January this year, the military announced the 16 officers were tried before a military court for attempting to oust the president. According to the charge sheet, the 6 defendants, who have yet to comment on the allegations, conspired with one another to levy war against the state to overawe the president. Let's head to the Middle East now, to Iran, specifically with President Donald Trump intending to begin bombing if progress is not made in a yet-to-be-decided second round of peace talks. In an interview with CNBC, President Donald Trump claims he is confident Washington will end up with a great deal, stressing that the U.S. is not dealing with the nicest people, but are doing so successfully. He further says he does not want to extend the ceasefire, which is due to expire tomorrow. Earlier, Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf said Tehran is preparing to show new cards on the battlefield if fighting with the U.S. resumes. U.S. media reports that Vice President J.D. Vance will travel to Pakistan today. Meanwhile, Iranian state media reports no Iranian diplomatic delegation, senior, junior, preliminary, or follow-up has so far traveled to Islamabad in Pakistan. Well, staying with the issue surrounding a second round of talks between the United States and Iran, the Pakistani city of Islamabad is set to be on high alert. Ahead of the proposed talks, the country's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi met with U.S. Chargé d'Affaires Natalie Baker in Islamabad on Monday to discuss arrangements for a possible second round of talks. Pakistan, along with other regional countries, is leading efforts to de-escalate tensions and push for a new round of talks between Washington and Tehran aimed at ending the standoff. Islamabad previously hosted a round of talks between the two sides from April 11th to the 12th, which did not yield results, following their agreement on April 8th for a conditional 2-week ceasefire. Staying with developments, human rights group Amnesty International has warned a predatory world order in grim rights reports. It painted a grim picture of the global state of human rights in its new annual report, which comes at a challenging moment that could destroy all that was built up over the last 80 years. The organization is calling on governments to reject the politics of appeasement and collectively resist attacks on multilateralism, international law, and civil society before this emerging order takes hold. In its assessment of the human rights situation across 144 countries, the report documents widespread violations of governments and other actors throughout the year 2025, alongside persistent failures of accountability with only limited areas of progress. The organization announced Washington's acts of aggression against Venezuela in January of this year, as well as the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran and Russia's ongoing assaults against Ukraine. Focusing on Israel's actions in Gaza, the report said the world's most powerful governments failed to take meaningful action to stop the genocide or to bring an end to Israel's unlawful occupation and apartheid. The report also slammed the United Kingdom for proscribing the Palestine Action Group and arresting thousands of peaceful protesters against the ban. It also underlined continued acts of violence in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and in Sudan. I want to bring in our international affairs analyst, Alexander Okonkwo. He joins us from here in Lagos, but virtually. Alexander, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. It's good to be back again. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's good to have you back. We've seen much rhetoric from the U.S. President Donald Trump in the lead up to the ceasefire that's ending tomorrow. However, this time, he's shown a lot of restraint away from the colorful choice of words and insults he's exerted against Iran in the past. Do you think he might be seriously considering bombing Iran, as he says today?
Yeah, well, okay, this is a very interesting one. First, let us clear with all Nigerians that this is a very irresponsible war on all grounds. I pen to see who is going to gain from this war on the long term, of course. On the short term, Israel and the US will gain, but on the long term, none of us will gain from this war. And then Donald Trump is very aware of the 4 scenarios that exist. Okay, that is why he is tempering his words, unlike what he used to say before. The first scenario is that no talks takes place at all, which is what we have, the status quo we have. And then, but there's a breakthrough in terms of installing a ceasefire. Because let's make it clear here. There are different levels where we should get to before things move forward. We are talking of them having talks for ceasefire. That means the ceasefire is extended beyond today, but talks still continue in terms of durable peace. Or there's also talks in terms of what happens in the Middle East going forward. So you see that various levels. That's why, as much as we are a bit afraid that the war might escalate, it is not yet necessarily as dangerous as it sounds. What is expiring today is the ceasefire agreement that was agreed 2 weeks ago. Okay? It does not mean that it will mean immediate escalation, because it's the ceasefire that is the status quo that expires today. But there can be an extension even if there are no talks. What I'm trying to say is that if there's an MOU.
Alex?
And discuss the US on phone. Yes. Can you
no,
hear me?
sorry. No, you froze for a minute, so just wondering if you were still there.
Okay. Okay. What I was saying is that if there's an MOU, to continue discussions, the ceasefire can still be extended. So Trump is aware of that. So he knows very well that because there are no talks today or tomorrow, does not mean the war escalates. But like we've mentioned in different discussions, he has an ego problem. We all know that already. So Donald Trump will need to show the Americans and the rest of the world that he can keep to his word. So it's not totally ruled out that a bit of bombardment here and there, especially for the bridges, the Iranian Republican Guards, one or two of their units can be attacked. But this is just to show that he can keep his words. But ultimately, his interest is to go for a ceasefire. I didn't say peace in the Middle East. I said ceasefire. Peace talks is something else. It's another level.
Yeah, indeed. And about those talks, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding whether they will hold or not. The U.S. does seem eager to sit at the table with the Iranians, but the Iranians say they do not trust the Americans. That's the problem.
Yes.
So America is still threatening to continue with the offensive against Iran. But who should give in at this point? Should the Iranians just, trust a little, or should the Americans show themselves trustworthy?
I know you remember what happened last year. You remember that when America said they were going to have talks with the Iranians, that was when they killed some of the... Do you remember very well?
Right.
In the UAE and all that. So they attacked them while they were preparing for talks. So when you've had such an enemy, in quotes, that has already failed you once, there's a good chance you will not believe his words. Because a few times the Iranian diplomats and experts in nuclear armament have been attacked and killed just before they went for peace talks. And in fact, it is still this same Donald Trump that canceled the peace agreement that was on ground with Iran and the US already several years back. So it's not a trustworthy president. As much as people think that he's a strong man and all that, he's not a trustworthy president. I do understand the Iranians on one level. Why would you still be having bombardments, the risk of bombardments? The US Army and the Israeli Army are all around Iran, and you're saying you're having talks. It's almost like you're telling your enemy that we have a gun just at his neck and you're saying sign the peace talks. No, it's not going to work. There's something we're not doing right. Let us bring it back onto the diplomatic level and then have proper talks. So I think the Iranians will be wise to go for a ceasefire. So what I'm trying to say is that the talks that we should have today, that they should have today and tomorrow, should be for a ceasefire, maybe over a month. And then during that ceasefire, have the real peace talks of what is going to happen in the Middle East. So it's a two-level thing. So I think the Iranians are not doing well not to come out for the peace talks. They should at least come out, because it's the Iranians that are failing right now. They are the ones not coming out, not saying they are going to Pakistan. If they decide to go to Pakistan, we can have the peace talks based on ceasefire. After that one, we can now start talking on the peace talks based on real peace in the Middle East. So there's a level to it, and it's understandable. They are kind of skepticism.
It's interesting you touch on the topic of diplomacy, because that's where Pakistan, which is the host of the talks, the proposed host for the talks, the first one and hopefully the second, has been saying that both sides need to consider diplomacy. While it is true that this war will end diplomatically, how will that be achieved?
Well, ultimately, yes, have US bases on their ground and are being attacked. They are the ones suffering this Strait of Hormuz blockage because they cannot sell, they cannot also import. These countries are countries that import a lot, contrary to what people think. While they sell gas, energy, and all that, they import a lot of finished products. So everybody is paying for it. Europe is also suffering because Europe is the prime exporter of finished goods, luxury goods. You can imagine all those shops you see at the airport, at Qatar, and all that, they are not being supplied. Then the east of East Asia, China and all that, are not also being, so a lot of people are not happy with what's going on. So everybody has interest that we move into peace talks very quickly. The only real country that is enjoying this is, well, there are two of them, the US, of course, and Israel, that actually had this agenda. Because Israel is using this to weaken Iran as much as possible. In fact, as we speak, bombardment goes on in Lebanon. So you can imagine how awkward all this sounds. You are saying, let's discuss peace, but at the same time, fighting is going on. As we speak right now, people are still being killed. So I think the United Nations, which I don't know if it still exists, you correct me, because it has now become an empty sack. United Nations is totally out of its place, not doing anything concrete to go get peace in that region. Believe you me, peace in that region will affect all of us, just like the crises are affecting all of us. The Middle East is called the Middle East for a reason. It is really a conflictuous point where all kinds of cultures meet. In fact, if you look at the military bases, the US military bases in the Middle East, you realize that they are much more than anywhere else. There's a reason why they are there. The Japanese have a military base there, I think in Djibouti. So everybody is present. The Chinese have a military base there as well. So we all have interest for there to be peace in the Middle East. So I'm really hoping that the Iranians accept to go to Pakistan, have that discussion, so that there will be a ceasefire, a prolonged ceasefire. I'm talking of 1 month at least, because 2 weeks went so fast. We're already at the end of by today. I think 3 o'clock in Washington time, the ceasefire will be over. So we really need to get longer ceasefire so that proper talks can be engaged. And one of the conditions Iran is giving is that the UN has to be involved, because they don't trust Israel and they don't trust the US, which we can all understand from last year's experience.
Indeed. Alexander, thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm glad I was able to catch you out of your very busy schedule for the day. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you very much.
Japan has relaxed decades-old restrictions on its arms exports, clearing the way for it to sell weapons to more than a dozen countries. Today's announcement marks a milestone in Tokyo's shift away from the pacifism that has characterized its post-war defense policy. It comes at a time of heightened tensions in the region. Restrictions that limit arms exports to just 5 categories: rescue, transport, warning, surveillance, and minesweeping will be lifted. This means Japan can now sell lethal weapons to the 17 countries with which it has defense agreements, including the US and the UK. A ban on arms sales to countries involved in conflict will stay, although it does not cover those that have defense pacts with Japan. Authorities in Tokyo say they will allow for exceptions in special circumstances. However, Prime Minister Takaichi says there is absolutely no change in commitment to upholding the path and fundamental principles followed as a peace-loving nation for over 80 years since the war. We're off on a short break now on The World Today. Still ahead. Well, meeting of France and Africa, its relations with the continent, where that stands in light of U.S. foreign policy towards South Africa. Stay with us.
Capital Market.
Welcome back. Sacked Foreign Office top diplomat Sir Ollie Robbins has accused the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer's team of putting constant pressure on him and his department over the vetting of former US Ambassador Lord Peter Mandelson at his bombshell appearance before MPs today. The session also heard claims that Starmer's office had told the Foreign Office under Robbins's predecessor to just approve Mandelson. He also appeared to blame Starmer's own judgment in appointing Mandelson for the row.
We're hoping that you're going to feel a bit freer to give a fuller answers to us than you did on the last occasion you appeared in front of us on the 3rd of November or in your letter of the 16th of September, when you clearly told us the truth, but you only told us part of the truth. And it's a little bit like, you know, saying I had to run to work today, but not saying that you were chased by a bear.
Thank you, Chair. And I know this sounds formal and maybe even a bit unlikely, but thank you very much for the opportunity today to come and speak to you about these matters. As you say, it has been a difficult time, leavened slightly by it being my birthday yesterday. When I walked into post as Permanent Under-Secretary on the 20th of January last year, I wasn't walking into a vacuum. I arrived to a situation in which a due diligence report had been undertaken into Mandelson by the Cabinet Office, assessing the reputational risks and his fitness for office. The Prime Minister had then presumably taken advice on his fitness for office. The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. He'd been given access to the building, he'd been given access to low classification IT, and from time to time, for case-specific issues, he was being given access to higher classification.
Relatives of at least 25 people killed in a powerful explosion at a fireworks factory in Tamil Nadu's Vindrudanagar district have refused to accept the bodies of the deceased as they have staged a road blockade, demanding compensation. Initial investigations suggest the explosion was triggered by friction during chemical mixing, exacerbated by extreme heat wave conditions. Reports say the factory was operating unlawfully on its designated weekly rest day, with about 40 to 50 workers inside the mixing shed, which is far exceeding the legal limit of 11 or 12. A second explosion in the same night further complicated rescue efforts, injuring several police and firefighting personnel at the scene. The factory owner and his wife are reported to have absconded. Prime Minister Narendra Modi described the incident as deeply distressing, extending condolences to those who lost loved ones and wishing a swift recovery for the injured. Trade between Africa and France is on an upward trajectory. Key barriers, however, continue to limit deeper economic cooperation. That's according to the Ambassador of France to South Africa, Lesotho and Malawi, David Martineau, who was speaking to the media earlier today. Our correspondent Innocent Mosa reports.
With the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi fast approaching, French Ambassador to South Africa, Lesotho and Malawi, His Excellency David Martineau, has outlined the key objectives of this high-level engagement During today's briefing, the ambassador detailed the specific measurable outcomes French hope to achieve in its bid to foster a new era of a continental partnership.
David Matinon says trade between Africa and France is on the rise, but there's still significant room for improvement.
So what could be bettered? Well, again, I will stick to what President Ramaphosa recommended us to do when he greeted the new ambassadors. I will stick to quiet diplomacy, and I will stick to being non-public about what could be improved.
Some political analysts say France should take a more active role in supporting African economies grappling with rising debt and constrained access to global capital markets.
So Africa is actually facing potentially emergency around debt and also around cost of living issues, fuel price issues. And I think the role of friends and other developed countries is to say, how can they partner with Africa? Partnership is important, not in the old style of, former colonial power versus, former colonies. There's inequality.
I think the French are certainly going to be operating in concert with a whole range of other countries, because debt is not simply a French issue or one African country issue. It's a much larger picture. It's a general...
But they can play a role.
Yes, of course they can play a role, but it will have to be part of a larger picture rather than simply the French making a decision, or the British or the Americans or anybody else.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has played down reports that his invitation to the upcoming G7 summit in France was withdrawn. Meanwhile, French Ambassador David Matinon has denied any U.S. pressure, saying the decision was simply to invite Kenya this time. However, Dr. Pilani Mthembu is not convinced.
The French Foreign Ministry will say that because that is what it has to say. But the reality, I think France needs to be quite grateful that President Ramaphosa downplayed it. We all saw on the sidelines of the G20, President Macron extending an invitation to President Ramaphosa. And of course, we all know what the fundamental issue was. The issue is the relationship, the bilateral relationship between South Africa and the United States.
As France looks to reposition its economic engagement with Africa, the upcoming Africa Forward Summit is expected to test whether these commitments can translate into tangible outcomes for the continent. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
And that's the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.